Morning. We're going to have to improvise a bit on two fronts. First of all, an announcement: if everyone could please shut off their mobile phones, that would be greatly appreciated. The fire exits, I hope we don't need them, are clearly labeled. If no one smokes, that would help that situation as well. We're in the unusual situation where we have only half the panel, so we're going to get started, and hopefully the other half will join us before we're out of time. So the two speakers we have, I think many of you will be familiar with. On my right, on my immediate right, is Daniyal Mueenuddin. He's the author of In Other Rooms, Other Wonders, this exquisite collection of short stories. And we'll also hope to dip into his forthcoming novel as well. And then we have Ebba Koch, the distinguished architectural historian. So this is provisionally titled A Sense of Place. And Ebba, I was wondering if you could start us off, since we are in Lahore, and this is an area that you've worked on. What does that term mean to you, particularly in the relevance of your work and the city itself?
Yeah, obviously, a sense of place for me is, in the widest sense, the Mughal Empire.
Okay. If you could just move that a bit closer. Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah.
No? Perhaps I move a little closer. So, can you hear me now? Okay, great. Okay.
Okay, we're joined by our other two panelists, yes? Okay, so now we're joined by Jeet, Thayil, the award-winning novelist, author of Narcopolis, a DSC prize winner, and another DSC prize winner, Naqvi. Now, unfortunately, gentlemen, we are against the clock, and so we've just started, and Ebba was telling us what a sense of place meant to her in terms of her work as an architectural historian and the city of Lahore. And we're going to try and keep this as fluid as possible. If you guys want to jump in, please go straight ahead, and we can just, take it from there.
Yeah, no, anyway, so I said a sense of place for me is the Mughal Empire, is Lahore, and Lahore was very much also a place of Jahangir. And of Jahangir, we have the words about Akbar, and I think it ties up very well with what Tariq Ali has been saying earlier in the morning. So now we have a Mughal comment on this situation, which I am going to read out to you. Jahangir says about his father's empire: the followers of different religions all had a place in the wide expanse of this incomparable empire. In contrast, in other countries of the world, like Iran, where there is only place for Shias, and in Rome, Hindustan of previous days, and Turan, where there is only place for Sunnis. All groups and followers of various religions have a place within the vast encompass of the divine mercy, in the same way in agreement with the principle according to which the shadow must follow its origin, meaning that the king is the shadow of God, so he has to follow God. In the kingdom of my father, which was only limited by the seas, there was space for various sects and for perfect and imperfect beliefs, and disputes were forbidden. Sunnis and Shias prayed in one mosque, and Franks and Jews within the same church. Absolute peace was his established custom. He prayed with those who were good in each group and in each religion, and in each sect, and gave attention to each one according to his position and his capacity of understanding. So I think that's a very important statement about the Mughals. So in a way one can see them, if we talk about place or space, as a utopia of the past.
A utopia of the past, that's interesting. Speaking of utopias and sense of place, H.M. Naqvi, one thing, actually all three of the novelists who are here, one thing I was mentioning to Daniyal earlier was, all three of you have written about, your novels are centered on a place that you've gone to as a second phase in your life. So Jeet, you grew up in Hong Kong and elsewhere, and then you go to Bombay. Hussein, your case, where it's a buildings romance set in New York, and Daniyal with southern Punjab. I want to start with you, HM. I mean, in terms of a sense of place, what does that mean to you, especially in the context of what is in some ways about the idea of migration, deracination, and how did that sort of influence your work, if at all?
I'm a native of Karachi. I happened to be in New York during a fraught and unsettled time. It was a time when everybody seemed to have been touched by history. I too was in some ways touched by history, and I sort of channeled those anxieties in reifying this world. I, however, am not a New Yorker. I've spent all of 2 years in the city. So it took research to construct a city that has been treated by prose, by fiction, by poetry for almost a century. So I had to think about how to come at it in a novel way. The protagonist of my novel, for instance, loses his job and starts driving a cab. In order for me to create a believable narrative, I did a lot of research. I ate where cabbies ate, slept where they slept, attended their schools.
Yes, we're back.
My dislocation or...
No, theirs. I mean, their stories, their idea, the fact that they'd had to move to these places, do this work, and so on, being away from home, coming with different ideas. Are they here to make a living and support their families somewhere else? That sort of thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Did you ever eat at Lahore Deli?
Which is on Houston? Yes.
Yeah.
But the
more pertinent question.
The best Gabi Dhaba in New York was located in Jackson Heights, and it features in Homeboy. It's known as Kebab King, and at Kebab King you got a killer plate of nihari.
Okay.
And, and the ritual of having nihari in Jackson Heights mitigated for the duration of the meal a sense of displacement.
That's a very interesting point, and I want to take that up with Daniyal if possible, because many of us will have read Daniyal's piece in the New Yorker not long ago, Samir and the Samosas, where food plays this interesting role in terms of that. Now, your next novel is also about a farm, and could you just tell me about why you decided to pick these two different things which are connected in a certain way, and yet these are two different places. that are important to you?
Yeah, my next book, which is hopefully will soon be appearing in a year or so, is about a girl from Wisconsin, and as it happens, I'm half American, so my grandfather was from Wisconsin, and I've had a long connection with that place, and so the story originates in that place. But I don't think you choose your stories kind of choose you, and the ones in my first book were the ones that were sort of resonated with me at that time. When I was casting around for a next project, those other stories of my mother's family in Wisconsin were the ones that somehow seemed important to me. People think that writers are strategic, but I don't think, at least I'm not strategic. I write what I sort of feel I have to write, and so that place somehow has been more vivid in my imagination subsequently.
Okay. Jeet, if I can turn to you. I suppose that point that Daniyal makes, that stories choose you, I suppose that applies to you as well in terms of what you decided to do with Narcopolis.
Well, I started out writing a book of non-fiction in 2005. Started writing a book of, what I thought was a book of non-fiction about religions in India. And I'm so glad I didn't write that book. There would have been 6.5 readers for it. None of them would be in this room. But while I was working on that book, I was on a residency in a very nice house in a very nice town, and I started to write something that was very obviously fiction. And it was a chapter that eventually occurs halfway through Narcopolis. It's a chapter called A Walk on Shuklaji Street. And it came out in a kind of a rush, and as I came to the end of it, I realized that without knowing it, I had stored all kinds of information from 30 years earlier, and it was a very exciting moment. And then I wrote around that chapter, before and after. So there was no question that the story chose me. It was, I had very little to do with it. And I think one of the things that you do as a novelist or as a writer of fiction is when something hits you, you follow it. I mean, I think it's the sensible thing to do. You follow wherever it takes.
What's also fun about that is that the way it comes to you initially is not the way it ends up being. So it's not just that it chooses you once; it keeps choosing you.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky, exactly, or not. But that it really, I mean, readers have a wonderful time with reading, we hope. But writers, I think, almost have a better time because we don't know what the story is going to be until it happens, and we're sort of tracing this thing through. And there are all these moments of recognition, which is, I mean, one of the reasons I think that I most like to write.
Well, there are writers who, before they start to write, they have every chapter worked out. Chapter 1, 2, 3 to the end. They know what's going to happen in every chapter.
Do you believe that? I mean, when people
there are some people who do it. It's an interesting question I want to ask everyone here, which is, I mean, you take a writer like Ian McEwan, who obviously lays these things out, chooses a different project for each one, structures it, has, and it works in a certain way. I mean, are you able to do that? I mean, Hussein, is that something that, if you're looking towards your next book in something, can you lay it out firsthand? And do you follow it through? And if you don't, do you restructure or do you just keep going?
As far as the mechanics of the genesis of Homeboy are concerned, I was at a place in Lower Manhattan known as CBGB's, and I was scrawling something on the back of a napkin I retrieved several weeks later, I had written some doggerel on it, and that doggerel required some more rigorous treatment, and Homeboy grew out of that cocktail napkin. And I quite literally made it up as I went along. I think that genre fiction, you can outline thrillers and mysteries, but I find it somewhat peculiar that Ian McEwan would structure his novels before he's written them. With my present novel, it's a novel set in Karachi, I have a sense of character, and the character has agency, develops agency, and does things. And so I sort of follow that character once I've created this character, which is different from how Homeboy began, which was more of a voice, almost incantation. So both novels have had different catalysts, but both of them I make up as I go along. I don't know what's going to happen, and I like it that way. It keeps me interested, and I like to think if it keeps me interested, it keeps the reader interested as well.
It's kind of this selfishness of the writer, isn't it? That I mean, I'm delighted that people like to read what I write, but I do it because I like to write what I write.
Exactly.
And that's the fun of it, is that process.
That's an interesting point, because I want to turn to Jeet. You write in different forms. You're a journalist, you're a poet, you're a novelist.
I'm no longer a journalist, thank God.
So, okay, fair enough. Well, I unfortunately still am.
Well, my condolences, and
Gravely received.
So anyway, I'm neither a journalist nor a novelist, but obviously also it happens that the subject chooses you,
Right.
I had this experience when I started working on Mughal architecture, because I had done European art history earlier. And when I walked into the great courtyard of the Maji Bhavan at the Agra fort, there was suddenly a column, a sort of baldachin, which really struck me. And then, in order to find out what was the cause of this attraction, I wrote my first article on the baluster column, which obviously was used by Shah Jahan as an imperial motif, but in the end, he took it from European engravings. So this is why I, as a European art historian, had reacted to it. So in order to find out what was the cause of this attraction, then I sort of wrote this piece. But when I wrote my book on the Taj Mahal, it was entirely different, because Thames and Hudson gave me something, like folded sheets with little squares looking like stamps, and each stamp was a page. And then for each chapter, I had so many stamps. And at the beginning, I was really taken aback, but then it was, in a way, fun to fill it out and to structure the book according to this very set rule. So, in a way, even for a scholar, both is possible.
Interesting. Well, related to that, Jeet, I mean, those are three very different forms of writing. And journalists, as we know, don't get to choose things the way that Daniyal, for example, suggested. And you also transition from poetry to the novel. Can you speak to what drives you in these different, in a more creative form of writing?
Sure. I honestly don't differentiate all that much.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I bring the same things to the whatever piece of writing. I also have a band and I work as a musician a few months of the year. So I bring pretty much the same things to whatever I might be doing on that day. And really it's the form. The difference within those genres is form. And it's also form that I'm interested in. I really shouldn't be saying this to civilians, but I'm always more interested in form than content, And really it's the form that drives the content very often. So if you're working on something that's a kind of a long poem, it has its own engine and it drives itself. And a novel is a completely different thing. That said, if you put poets and novelists together in a room, it's always the poets who are having more fun. Because, you know, at 2 in the morning, the poets will be drinking wine and dancing on tabletops. The novelists will have gone to bed at about 11 because they're...
Which novelists are these, by the way?
No, no.
Well, not you.
Not me.
Well, unless you're H.M. Naqvi and you start at 3 a.m.
I work late, yes. I work till 6 in the morning.
Jeet, hold on. No, not about the dancing on tables. Isn't it a really fundamentally different form of inspiration? I mean, like, writing a novel is sort of like making sausage. You know, you pour all the ugly things into it, and then you just crank the handle. Whereas poetry seems to be it's a totally different way of coming to it.
It's more like a kadhai.
Exactly. Maybe, right. No, but
Bhujia.
exactly. No, but you can't choose to write a poem, can you? I mean, it seems to me that's something that happens to you.
No, my last book, I actually worked on it every day.
I see.
Like I would be working on a novel, except they were poems that I was writing. And, you know, I know poets who do that. And the American poets, for example, you know, these are, I mean, Indian poets hate them because, you know, Indian poets produce 1 book in 10 years. American poets are doing 1 a year, you know, because that's what they do. That's the job. And they're there like, you know, like a 9-to-5 job writing poems. It's an astonishing thing.
There's the famous thing that the famous phrase that poets are men who spend their lives sitting out in rainstorms waiting to get hit by lightning.
Wallace Stevens.
Yeah, right.
Exactly right.
But I guess the question is what you do while you're sitting there waiting for it to happen. And I guess one of the things you can do while you're waiting for it to happen is write poetry.
Well,
but most poets only have about 4 or 5 poems, right? I mean,
well,
really.
You know, he said that meaning that you have to be out there in the rain every day.
Right.
Because you may be hit by lightning once in your life, or maybe twice, if you're lucky 2 or 3 times in your life.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean you're not out there in the rain every day, hoping to be hit by lightning.
But your friends who are there at 3 in the morning dancing on tables, they're also standing in the rain, right? They're just it's different rain. I mean,
For the last 9 years, have maintained a very rigorous schedule. I work till 6 in the morning. I wake at 2 in the afternoon. I have breakfast at 4.
Is this called rigorous, by the way? That sounds like a very relaxed schedule to me.
So thank you for interrupting your sleep today to join us.
Yeah, really, it was not easy.
By the way.
I work from 4:30 to 6:30. I take a break. I work from 8 to 11, my second session.
Okay.
I have lunch around midnight. And I then...
By the way.
I work from 4:30 to 6:30. I take a break. I work from 8 to 11, my second session.
Okay.
I have lunch around midnight. And I then work till 6 in the morning. So for the last 9 years, I have more or less adhered to this very regimented, and yes, waking at 2 in the afternoon might seem leisurely, but I am working throughout the day.
These are, by the way, the same hours that Pakistani politicians keep, I think, isn't it?
And Yasser Arafat.
And yes. Daniyal, you mentioned earlier that all of you said that there are these stories that grab you and you go with them. Would you ever pursue a novel and then abandon it maybe and to start a new one? Or do you see it all the way through?
I think that's one of the most, I mean, I'm writing my first novel, but I've tried to write a couple of...
Well, even in short stories, for example.
Let me finish my thought.
Yeah.
Which is that I think that with a short story, sort of you can get over it, you know. But I think that whenever I mean, at least I find, whenever I'm writing anything, there comes this point when I absolutely hate it, you know, and it's about 2/3 of the way through, and it's sort of as if you've been eating for too long, and you're just totally stuffed, and you can't eat anymore, and you're disgusted with the thing, and it's really tough to get past that point. That's what I find. I've abandoned 2 novels, and I've now not abandoned 1.
You can always take it up again.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But there is that, I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but there is that moment of really hating what you do, and that then you have to somehow get past that.
Ebba, does that ever happen to you in terms of the work that you do?
Oh, it's my continuous condition, because I'm working on a book on the palaces and gardens of Shah Jahan since about 30 years. And this has become so overbearing and so much material to deal with. So I took 10 years off to write my book on the Taj Mahal in between, as a sort of break, let's say.
Okay.
So some projects can really take a very long time. Okay.
Jeet?
I abandoned 2 novels before I wrote one. And I think the first one was about 15,000 words, the second was about 10. And the first happened before internet and before you email things to yourself, so there's no record of it at all, and I'm so happy, you know. I don't want to be pursued by those books at some point in the future.
But anyway, even with Narcopolis, I mean, what I understand is you got halfway through. You decided to do that great prologue in one sweep,
Yeah.
right? The longest sentence ever written.
Well, not the longest, but pretty long.
I was just kidding.
There's a novel that's a sentence long, so, you know.
No. So,
Marquez,
I mean, did you...
No,
Patriarch.
Harabal, the Turkish author.
But you felt comfortable about starting again and putting that as a prologue and then writing the whole way through?
Well, in fact, I think that, you know, I couldn't have done the prologue, I couldn't have started with the prologue,
Right.
because it wasn't until I knew the shape of the story that I was able to write that.
Okay.
And also writing that for me was a very useful thing, because I then rewrote the book because I realized I'd found the voice that the book should be in, and that was long sentences rather than short ones.
So you wouldn't see it as a waste of time or anything, it's just, you're grateful for that?
Very grateful. Yeah, I mean, it took, you know, I then worked on it for another 2.5 years. It took a long time, but I have no regrets.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to open it up to the floor. You can ask questions about anything, writing, well, whatever, a sense of place even. Do people have microphones?
A sense of place or a place of sense?
It's up to you.
Oh my, that's profound.
Could we get a microphone over there, please? Yes?
Hello. My question is...
Wait, who's speaking?
I'm...
Okay. Okay, yes, go ahead, then we'll come back here.
Yeah. Okay, so you write novels, and you know, a novel takes forever. So how do you feel like, you know, there you are, you're spending so much time, you're writing, and you say, oh my God, will this ever see the light of day? What are those feelings, those doubts that you may go through while in this long process of writing?
I think he has a very good answer to that.
And you have to be independently wealthy to do something like that, devote 3 years to writing. Thank you.
Tell us your backstory.
Writing is it's a fraught process that's defined by anxiety. Halfway through Homeboy, for instance, my back gave way, and I happened to be in the States. I happened to be fairly destitute, and consequently I couldn't afford healthcare. So I couldn't see a doctor. And for, I think, 5-6 months, I would take over-the-counter medication, which is ibuprofen. And in retrospect, I think my back giving way had a psychosomatic component, because it was exactly halfway through Homeboy, and the anxiety that one has worked on something diligently and with some passion, but it might never see the light of day, caused great anxiety. I remember one day I told myself that all you have to do is sit and write, so you have to just sit down, and I started doing push-ups. And I did 2 push-ups the first day, I did 4 the next, and I worked up over the course of a month to do about 100. And to this day, I do close to 100 push-ups a day, and my back has never acted up again. I'm about halfway through my second manuscript, and I'm hoping that my back will not fail me this time.
You know, I think every novelist in this room will have a horror story about the first book and about the kind of, the kind of pain and kind of horror that you have to go through without any idea that you're ever going to see light at the end of the tunnel, that it might ever be published. And of course, it might be, and then ripped to shreds by critics. But the underlying thing in all these stories is it's a heroic activity.
And, no, but it's, people, it sounds like it's so easy, you sort of sit there, all you have to do is sit there and write your 300 words a day, but actually it does require a kind of a courage, and the courage is that you never quite are sure that this is going to work. And this is your major activity.
Sorry. Yeah, no, it's very hard, to get down, to sit down and start with it. So one does all sorts of activities, before, sort of tidying up the flat, or, sort of doing menial tasks, because it's very hard to find this moment, really sit down behind your computer, or earlier it was typing machines, and really start to do the work. So it needs a lot of courage, as you say.
Yeah, I have a question.
Who has a question?
Yeah.
When
you start writing a book, do you have a certain kind of audience in mind, or is it just like the stories just dances out of you? Like as Arundhati Roy, she has said in God of Small Things that it's wrong to think that writers cull stories from the world. It's the other way around, stories cull writers from the world. And then she says she wakes up every day and these stories dances out of her. So do you is it like that way, or do you want to address a certain kind of audience?
Do you have a reader in mind?
But, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think that's one of the... All right,
someone
let's
didn't
shame somebody right here. Let's find them. Where the hell are they? Just kidding.
You have to come up here and talk,
exactly.
Talk on the mic.
Talk about a census place.
No, but hold on, guys. It really is interesting, because you have this thing that's very personal, which is like your subjective story and the thing you're planning to do and the story you want to tell. But then it is a process of telling, and there's this strange sort of movement between the privacy of what you do and then making it public. And I think that's one of the really complicated things that we negotiate. I mean, there's a part of, I think, most writers that sort of wants to keep it all private. You don't want to communicate it, you just want to luxuriate in that world. And then at some point you really have to say, okay, I concede that there has to be an audience, and then you put it out.
But also, if you think about an audience and a specific audience, and you think what demographic they might be, and what color they might be, and which nationality, and what age and income bracket, and yes, that's the income bracket I want to. I think you'll be paralyzed. I don't see how you could possibly.
But at the same time, you are always having to be aware of it. Sorry.
Have you been surprised by the people who've come up to you and the type of readers that you've encountered who said, they enjoyed the book, and you may not have thought that it would appeal to these sorts of people?
I write because I feel worthless if I don't produce my daily quota of 300 words a day. It's intrinsic to me. It's necessary. So I write without any reader in mind. At the same time, I would like to think that the book has resonance as a story, and resonance in some larger way. Homeboy, for instance, contends with 3 young men coming of age. It's a Bildungsroman. At the same time, it also contends with these great socio-political vicissitudes. So, although the imperative to write is personal, one would hope that it has resonance, and the book has a different resonance in America. It has a different resonance in Pakistan, and it has a different resonance in India. The book has also obviously been translated to Portuguese. I don't know what resonance Homeboy has in Brazil.
On that point, I wanted to raise this with Jeet. When your novel came out, there was, I think it came out in India first, so there were these reviews in India that weren't...
Oh, you can say it, that were savage.
that was savage. Then it gets reviewed in the West,
Yeah.
and it's celebrated. And then it comes back to India again, and you win the DSC prize.
Yeah. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us that Indians are the last colonials. That's what I think. We still need the white man to tell us what's good about our own culture.
Do we have more questions? Yes? So this young woman's been waiting for a long time, so if we could just pass the mic to... Yeah.
Now it's on. I live in Los Angeles. I've lived there for 25 years, and I get the New Yorker. So this is for Daniyal Mueenuddin. I heard you at Romans in Pasadena when you were promoting your first book, and a woman had asked you a question about the characters, and she said they seem very real, especially the woman in Islamabad. So is somebody angry with you in Islamabad? And you said, nobody reads in Pakistan. And I was very perturbed because I had brought my whole book club there. I have actually I was in 3 book clubs at that time. I had a Pakistani book club, and then I live in Claremont where they're all professors, and we have another book club. And both my book clubs read that book at my suggestion. And it's very interesting because, so it's 2-pronged question. First, and it was very similar to what the question was already asked, because when we were driving from Islamabad, we were saying that there are lots of things, my both book clubs read the same book and one loves it, and the Pakistani book club would say, oh, that's so stereotypical and all that. So, and we decided in the car that Daniyal Mueenuddin has an audience in mind when he writes, because your stories come in the New Yorker. Very few people read the New Yorker here. I haven't met anybody who's read your story. Okay, I haven't, but so I love the stories, Samir and the samosas and all that, but I do feel that you have the Western audience in mind. And because if you think that nobody reads in Pakistan...
Well, hold on, 2 things. One thing is that the people collected in this room are not representative of the general Pakistani population. So, you know, the people who are sitting in this room are people who've been Western educated in some sense. I mean, people who've... you wouldn't be reading us if you didn't read the canon, more or less. So, so that's... you know, when I say that people don't read in Pakistan, I merely mean that the general population is not reading effete short stories. One, and what was the second part of the question?
Second part of the question was, do you have a Western...
Yeah, of course I do. I mean, you know, that's where the audience is for literature in English.
Interesting. Does that affect you, Jeet? Because there's a big, in contrast to Pakistan, there's a big English readership in India.
Well, you know, there are bits in Narcopolis that unless you speak Hindi, in fact, even a kind of a Bombay Hindi and Urdu, there are lots of things in references in Narcopolis that a reader will not get. And there's no glossary. And I mean, you can, as you get 3/4 into the book, you kind of figure out what certain words mean and what certain phrases mean. But there are levels that you will miss out on. But, you know, I think that's fine, because a book by Saul Bellow, read by a reader in Pakistan. There are many things that you'll miss out unless you know about Jewish culture in New York, for instance, you know. So.
But there's some things that someone can pick up. I mean, HM, you know, when you write Tuade, Tute, Pute, people get that, don't they, in the West?
I would like to remind us that the tradition of writing in English in the subcontinent is very old. In 1794, if I am not mistaken, a man named Deen Muhammad from Patna wrote the first, what is considered the first travelogue in English. In that way, the tradition of English almost predates the Urdu novel, which is the first Urdu novel is considered to be Umrao Janada, which is about 100 years old. So we've been at it for a very long time, and you know, since then there was Ahmad Ali and Atiya Hussain and Zulfikar Ghose and so on. So it always seems that English is an import, but Urdu is also an import in the subcontinent. And in India, उनने उर्दू को अपना लिए, अंग्रेजी को अपना लिए, कौमी ज़बान बनाई है. हमने नहीं किया है और कर लेना चाहिए.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Well, this is not just a sense of place, but it's a time-place offering. And I've called it the Kite Flying Festival, Basant. And I'm doing this because at so many festivals, we hear prose for hours, and no poet ever has a chance, except in the poetry section, to make a contribution. And this is quite short. Basant, Basant, the cry goes up. Soon the kites are flying from the walled cities, flat rooftops, and parks where families picnic. Legend surrounds the festival that killjoys have tried to outlaw. But Basant has roots in the Sultanate and in Sikh and Mughal times. And still the glass door unwinds as an old man alerts his grandson to the red kite swooping bird-like to cut the boy's kite and claim it. There is passion.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we're just running out of time. We don't have much time, and I'd really like to get questions in. There are a lot of people who want to ask questions, but thank you for that. Yes, the young woman over there. Can someone get her a microphone, please?
I quite enjoyed that.
We could have, just questions, please.
Yeah, hi. My name is Aisha, and I'm very glad to be here. My quick question is, how do you all deal with doubt when you start writing the novel and when you're in the middle of it and towards the end? If each of you could give me your version.
Push-ups.
Push-ups. Daniyal, you're in the middle of one.
Yeah, doubt is just like something you deal with every day, and the only thing that I find is useful is just to say, well, it doesn't matter. Who cares? I mean, even if, this book is successful, it won't be read in 500 years, so it doesn't really matter. It's just a game for one, and take it from there.
Jeet?
I think doubt is just another word for ambition. The more doubt you have, the harder you'll work, and I think it's a very good idea to befriend your doubt and to nurture it and to use it. It can be a driving force.
Ebba, do you have doubts in terms of your work? Does it affect you?
Yeah. I had doubts publishing my first book on Mughal architecture because it was very brief. So I felt, it was difficult to do justice to such a big subject in a short way, but students love it.
Great. More questions? Yes. I need to turn to sort of different section of the room. I keep going to the center for some reason.
Excuse me.
Is there anyone at the back who wants to ask a question?
Yes.
Whoever's gesticulating wildly over there. Could someone get him a microphone, please?
Yes, I did get a microphone.
Oh, you've got one? Okay, great.
Yes.
You go, and then we'll go to the person behind you. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is for Jeet. He did talk about content and form. Could you define form, what it means to you? Thank you.
When it comes to poetry, I've always preferred to work with form. I think there's a reason why, for instance, say the sonnet has lasted for all these hundreds of years and why it will continue to last. There's something in the form, in the rhyme, in the rhythm that reminds us of stories that we've heard as children. And there's something in the rhythm, there's something in the rhyme that makes it easy to remember, that makes it like a song. And that's what a sonnet is. And I think it can be very useful to use, especially a very strict form. I think a sestina or a canzone, which, they're fiendishly difficult forms because you don't use rhymes, you use entire words as rhymes. But the thing is, it's such a strict form that if you come up with the first line, you know what the second line the word that the second line will end with, and the third and the fourth, and in fact the entire stanza. So the poem writes itself. And it's a contradiction, it's a paradox, but the stricter the form, the easier to write. I find it an incredible kind of aid in writing.
Okay. Is anyone else? You got a mic. Okay.
My name is Aisha.
Wait, what's going on with the mics? You guys are handing them out like samosas. Who's got a question?
I have.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm a literature student from LGS, and I would like to know how difficult is it to get a publisher?
How difficult is it to get a publisher? Very good.
I'm not here.
It depends how.
Do you have a novel?
No.
Well, one thing I think, budding writers could certainly start with is they could speak to Aisha Raja, who runs a short story competition, and that's one of the things available here. Yes, over there.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Could we move from center to the left, sir?
I honestly don't know what's happening with the mics, so whoever's got one, if they signal to me,
it's with me right now.
Okay, yeah, sure.
You can see me, right?
Okay.
I'm quite a heartbeat away from dying here because I can see these people. I have been always reading them, and it's a great privilege to be here. I'm a lecturer at a university, public university, and I'm teaching Pakistani literature for several years now. And H.M. Naqvi is very much loved with us here. We are working on him as well. My question is that, as very aptly the title of this discussion is The Sense of the Place. So, is it the memory that is necessary to have to conjure up a sense of a place for writing a novel? I have killed a novel today in the morning when I was getting up. I daily kill novels. I think novels. I'm an aspiring writer as well. Is it the memory that you want to have, as it is a Pakistani-American diaspora novel, Homeboy, and or it is the physical feeling of staying at Karachi that is helping you write more aptly to convey to that is the ideology or the nationalism or something like that belongs to you, you belong to culture. How much important is that for you to write, if I'm clear?
I happened to be in the States when I attempted writing a novel. I have been writing since I was a child, and most of my stories, all of my stories are set in Pakistan, in Karachi, end of town to another. But Karachi is one of the largest cities in the world, and for this particular novel, my second novel, I have had to conduct a lot of research. I explore different neighborhoods on foot. I absorb atmospheres that in neighborhoods that I have not been to. And Karachi keeps expanding. So neighborhoods like Razakabad and Pipri and Qazafi town, past the steel mills, Waziri neighborhoods, Balochi neighborhoods didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. And so I almost work as an academic, an anthropologist sometimes, and I draw on oral histories. So it's in a city like Karachi and a city like Lahore, which is very large. I find there's a story under every stone.
Okay, that was questions. We're going to finish off with the poem, and yeah.
Oh, I should tell you my name. I'm Jocelyn.
Great.
There is passion in kite flying and a certain patience too, like fishing alone in a river and not getting a bite all night. Basant is for everyone. Relations and friends cross the border, looking and laughing in yellow apparel, saris, shalwars, gay blouses and jeans. There is music and dancing and eating, of course. Halim, chicken tikkers, kebabs, and for you, vegetarian dishes and sweets by the ton. The mustard seeds flowering, spring's in the air, and the bright kites are flying upwards and on. I lived more than 40 years in rural Punjab, but as my accent shows, I'm Australian.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And if we could have a round of applause for our speakers today, H.M. Naqvi, Jeet, Thayil, Ebba, Koch, Daniyal, Mueenuddin. Thank you. There'll be a short break, but you'll probably want to come back here after it, because we will have Nadeem Aslam in conversation with Declan Walsh. So that'll be another great session here. Thank you.